My father was a single parent, but an extreme narcissist and abuser. He's actually been incarcerated in prison for 8 years and counting for the abuse he inflicted on my brother and me. I'm sure I'll write more posts in the future explaining the details of that, but I won't get heavy on my first post. I'd like to talk about some of the lighter stuff he did when I was younger that resulted in years of embarrassment, and eventually led to me lying so I could experience some normalcy in my childhood. So, I come from a broken and confusing family. My mother and my father divorced when I was a few months old, and my brother was 2. My mother was an extreme shrug addict, and my father a serial narcissist. Quite the volatile pair, so I personally think that things may have been worse had they not divorced. In a surprising turn of events, the courts actually granted my grandparents custody of my brother and me. I'm not sure exactly what the details leading to that decision were, but something tells me that it had to do with my mother being blitzed out every day and my father leaving my brother and I locked in the car during the court hearing. Our grandparents cared for us for 8 years, but ultimately gave my brother and I back to our father, because he was threatening them constantly with violence, and they couldn't take it anymore. Doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why or if they had authorities involved, but it is what it is, and all is said and done. Unfortunately, I can't ask them about it, as they've all passed away. After our father got us back, it was almost like it was his mission to make our lives miserable. The worst part about it is that doing this brought him pleasure. The more sadistic and cruel he was, the happier he'd be. He only interacted with us when he had to, and when he did it was either for his own gain or to belittle and abuse us. He was a very sick man, and I'm grateful I was able to escape him when I was 16. I have a restraining order against him. Word has it that when he was served the order he was surprised, even though the reason he is in jail is because of the abuse he inflicted on me. He was actually put up for a parole evaluation in February, and he was denied. During his speech, he said, "I've hurt some people, but never specified or even mentioned my brother and me. He's disillusioned, disconnected, egotistical, and unremorseful." Anyway, enough with the vague backstory. Let's talk about the title. My father hated contributing to my school, or anything that involved me doing something he had to pay for or couldn't supervise. This included field trips. I wish I could say there was only one time this happened, but this was recurring every time that I brought home a permission slip. I would put it on the counter hours before he got home, so that I was as far away from him as possible when he read it. It didn't matter if it was for the zoo, a movie, amusement park, anything. His first and only reaction was anger. Pure anger. I think it stemmed from his contempt of giving my school any money. I went to public school, so it wasn't like he was paying any tuition or boarding fees. It's also not like we didn't have any money. My dad was always buying expensive car parts, items for his growing room, and other expensive items that were only for him. Yet if I needed $15 for a field trip, $20 for lunch money for a month, based off his reactions, you'd think I would ask him to buy me a concert ticket every week. This is part of another story, but he would actually only give us $20 for school lunch and expect it to last 3 months. If we asked for more any sooner, he would scream at us and accuse us of using the money for something else. $20 for 3 months. When he would read these permission slips, he would start off on a tirade about how incompetent my teachers were and how pathetic they were for asking him for money, even though it was all directly going towards buying me tickets for an event or other expenses. It seemed like he thought the teachers were lining their pockets with his money, and I was the one he would take it out on. Each time I gave him a slip, he would yell for about 15 minutes, and he would make sure I heard it. This led to me feeling a lot of anger and shame about just wanting to have fun with my classmates, because he would make me feel like I was the problem, like I was too expensive and an inconvenience. It was a stark contrast to how my grandma would make me feel. She would actually volunteer for field trips and the school store, just so she could be close to me while I was at school. To have that sudden contempt thrown at me by someone who's supposed to care for me after years of being validated by someone I loved and who loved me back. It was one of the many reasons I began to suffer from depression at 11 years old. Anyway, I digress. My father's next step was always the same. He would take a pen and write horrible things to my teachers on top of the permission slip. He would write about how incompetent and greedy they were, how they were low lives and idiots, how they just wanted his money, even though my education was free. He would write on these permission slips, top to bottom, slews of hate and insults. He'd still sign it, though, and provide the money so I could go. He would make me turn this in, though. He would make me hand the teachers these papers full of filth and hate. Obviously, they knew it wasn't me who wrote it, but the shame and embarrassment that came from giving them those papers. It might have been easier on my conscience if I just never went on the field trips. These things weren't reported either. I will never understand why. My father also always followed up to make sure I gave the teachers these slips and would ask me what their reactions were. I would always say, I gave it to them, but they didn't say anything, which was true. When I was in 8th grade, I was really becoming conscious about the shame and embarrassment that my father's rants and ego caused me. I remember that there was another field trip, and I wanted to go, but there was no way I was going to give my father this slip to deface. So, I found a check with his signature on it, and I forged his signature. It wasn't great, it was sloppy and gritty, and you could tell it was forged. I thought I'd try my luck anyway, and I paid for the trip out of my own pocket. I got caught immediately, and my teacher held a conference with me and the principal, but not my father. In the moment I believed that I just didn't do a good enough job, which may have been true. Now that I'm older, I realize that they knew I forged it because the paper wasn't covered in insults. They gave me another slip and gave me one more chance to have it signed properly. I don't recall how the rest of that story went, or if I even went on the trip. I just remember the fear boiling in my belly knowing I had to talk to my father about forging his signature. Long story short, my father is a grade A piece of shit. You should never jeopardize your child's mental well-being or integrity because you don't want to pay for a field trip. Just don't sign the damn thing and figure something else out. My dad viewed me as a pawn to get his awful and misguided points across, to try and establish dominance in a situation that had nothing to do with him. I have so many stories I want to share about him, and I hope that they resonate with some people and let them know, or let me know, that we're not alone.